Heidi Rogers is a family nurse practitioner and an educator at the University of New Mexico. She has found that spending time in nature is helpful for her own health and well-being, and recently completed training in mindful outdoor leadership. She is currently in training with the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy to become a forest therapy guide. All right, Heidi, thank you for being here tonight. I'll give you the floor,
okay.
And I will be here to help in any way I can. Are you able to
share my screen? Thank you. Hi, friends. I love seeing, I think half of you I know. So I'm so excited to be here and to talk to you about something that I'm really passionate about. Let me just go ahead and share my screen. So I'm here to talk about the art and science of forest bathing, and I love PEEC so much, and I'm just so completely happy to be spending this evening with all of you and with the folks at PEEC. It's my hope that at some point in the future that we'll be able to do some forest bathing together, so stay tuned. So first I'd like to just start with the gratitude and land acknowledgement. And so here in Los Alamos on the Valles Caldera, we are on Jicarilla Apache land and also the home of the Tewa people, the Pueblo people. And I just want to acknowledge that this is their land, and land that's been loved and cared for by a lot of different people over the years. So forest bathing. So a lot of people ask me, when I say the word forest bathing, all sorts of ideas pop into people's heads, mine included when I heard the term the first time. So what is it? So the term forest bathing is actually a translation from the Japanese term Shinrin-yoku, which is loosely translates into forest air bathing, or taking in the atmosphere of the forest. So forest bathing is actually a practice that's been documented for centuries in numerous cultures all over the world. Spending quiet time connecting in nature is basically the practice. But the practice of Shinrin-yoku actually started in Japan in the 1980s. The practice of Shinrin-yoku actually started in Japan in the 1980s, and it was actually a government program that was started by the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, and Fisheries to encourage their citizens to spend more time in nature, because they were starting to see more stress-related illness, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, stroke, heart disease, and they were worried that it was because of stress and a change in lifestyle from a more rural, natural, human work to urban settings, to high stress settings. So the government amazingly cared about the health of their folks, and they started to set aside forest land for people to spend quiet time in, just being with the trees and the plants, breathing in the air of the forest. There's now 62 designated land areas in Japan where people can get prescriptions and go to these areas for Shinrin-yoku practice. So pretty cool. And in Europe, and I just learned this building this PowerPoint, this practice is called silvotherapy. So if you're Googling things, or you want to go on an adventure and you're in Europe, it's actually called silvotherapy. So let's talk about, what is it about forest bathing or Shinrin-yoku or silvotherapy that's healthy, and why do we think it's good for people? So first of all, there's the science of the trees. I've learned a lot about this in the last year, not being a chemist by nature, but the trees have essential oils, natural, uh, just terpenoids basically, and our immune system is actually boosted through breathing in these essential oils that these plants and trees and these antimicrobial volatile compounds that that these trees emit. So terpenoids are a diverse plant, fungal, bacterial metabolites with more than 100 genes. There's 4 main terpenoids that have been studied, and the impact of spending time breathing these in for health benefits. So there's the pinene. These are the more aromatic plants and they have antioxidant, antibacterial, antifungal, anti-inflammatory, and anti-cancer properties. So very good for us. Then there's borneol, which is also secreted by many plants. And this is a transport molecule that increases membrane permeability to the blood-brain barrier. And so it actually helps to get the other compounds of the forest into the body and into the brain a little bit better. And then there's linalool, which is a component of essential oils that have sedative effects, and limonene, which is the citrus oils, which actually can act as an insect repellent and solvent, increase liver enzymes, and can be anti-carcinogenic and detoxifying. So there's a lot of really interesting science to the trees. It's why there's so much research. In my nursing practice, we do a lot of research in aromatherapy and these essential oils and the health benefits of them. And there's a lot. And so when we go out into the forest, we're breathing them in, we're taking them into our bodies, and they've been studied and have known benefits for human health. And then there's also the science of the experience. So there's a bunch of theoretical concepts for health and healing. First, just mindfulness. So when we're quiet in nature, just being quiet, being present, focusing. Then there's actually a theory called Kaplan's attention restorative hypothesis. Is just about, what about the experience of spending quiet time in nature is how does that benefit us emotionally? And it's got 4 components to it. There's been a lot of research on this, and so it's this theory is really backed up by a lot of research. There is a component about being away. So when we move environments from our day-to-day human lives and the busyness in our heads, and we separate out from that and we go into a totally different zone or place of being, that actually gives us, it reduces our stress hormones, and it helps improve mental health, but it also drops our blood pressure and helps us feel better. There's also this thing called soft fascination, which I think is really interesting. And soft fascination is this idea about, when we're working or we're in our busy human lives, we do a lot of hard fascination where we're focusing very specifically on the task at hand. Soft fascination is something that, in contrast to that, is sort of wondering and curiosity and just watching. So the experience of watching, a jackrabbit run through a mesa, or a butterfly land and flap her wings on a flower and sit there for a bit, or a squirrel gathering some nuts and taking them to their nest and then coming back and gathering more nuts. So when we spend time just observing or paying attention, that's a soft fascination, and that's one of the components that Kaplan's theory addresses about why it's just so nice to be in nature. And then there's about extent and compatibility, which is really about how can we, and this is just a part of the hypothesis, is that when we go into nature, ideally into places where we're comfortable and we feel safe and protected. So not all nature spaces feel like that for us, depending on what's going on, weather and other things. But when we can really sit in a quiet, just a grove of trees, a grove of aspens, or a little field where we feel sort of nestled in, and we feel comfortable and we feel like we belong, that's an experience that we have that actually helps with this overall health benefit of nature therapy. There's other theories as well about why spending time in nature feels good. Ulrich's stress reduction hypothesis is actually about just what is it to view beauty and calming nature scenes. So this hypothesis has been tested for they've done a lot of really interesting research just about viewing nature versus being in nature. And one thing the nurses in the house, we have a few, will be interested in is some interesting research based in this hypothesis about people who are in hospitals who are given rooms with windows that look out over nature scenes have shorter stays. So they did a randomized control trial on similar patients with similar surgeries and their recovery time, and found that that of all of the things, having a window view over nature helped to reduce hospital stays. So that's this and why would we get better faster after a surgery? If it's stress reduction, it actually turns out that that when our cortisol levels go down, our immune system can be more engaged and can help us heal. And then also there's just this contrast from human distractions. So what is it to go from our busy day-to-day, very public, very loud lives, particularly before we had a pandemic when we were then home all the time, but to go from that to more quiet nature spaces. And then there's this other really fantastic theory about why it feels so good to be in nature and why it's healthy and good for us. And it's by Kellert and Wilson, who wrote a book called Biophilia in the 1990s about that, just saying or just talking about how as humans evolving on this planet, our entire human existence has been in nature until just this most recent time, and we are built to really feel comfortable and welcomed in natural spaces. So I'm sure we'll have some questions and talk about this a little bit more, but these are sort of the theories around like, why is experiencing nature? Like, why does it feel good and why does it benefit our health? So what does it benefit? So, this is sort of where I think the research has been really interesting. So the first thing that we know, and there's been a lot of research on this, is that spending time in nature, even an hour, increases our natural killer cells, so NKCs. Natural killer cells are sort of our first line of defense for our immune system. So there are our white blood cells, kind of the most type of white blood cells that we have. And so white blood cells are responsible for making sure that that we can respond to viruses and bacteria and funguses, and also other infections and problems in our bodies quickly, and also decreased inflammatory markers. So we have less inflammation in general after spending a little bit of time in nature. The other thing that that we get is a lowered blood pressure and a lowered pulse, and that is basically related to um, probably a lower cortisol and adrenaline, so lowered stress hormones, but also about decreased brain natriuretic peptide and endothelin 1, which are two chemicals that are in our body that that when we have a lot of them, they tighten up our blood vessels and increase our blood pressure, so they're vasoconstricting. And when we have less of them, it's vasodilating, which means that our blood vessels expand out and for lack of a better word, we're a little bit more flowy with our fluids. There's also decreased heart rate variability for folks who spend more time in nature. And this is actually really interesting. Heart rate variability is the difference between baseline heart rate and stressed heart rate. And when the variability between baseline and stressed is wider, it means that our baseline is actually lower and that we're doing better or we're calmer at baseline. When we have a shorter or tighter heart rate variability, that's actually a sign of chronic stress. And spending time in nature actually helps to undo that, which is really good. Our blood vessels and our heart like to relax and have times when our heart rate's slow, our blood vessels are dilated in between those times when we need to have a response to something. Also super helpful for respiratory health. So spending time in nature, and we do think actually breathing in the essential oils of the trees and the plants helps support a healthy lung microbiome. Also our immune function in our lungs, and also there's a little more fresh air when there's plants. We have a lot of air pollution on our planet. Plants help to clean that up. We need a few more plants on our planet, if you ask me, because we have quite a bit of air pollution. But that's how spending time in nature actually really helps with respiratory health. Also, and I mentioned this before, the stress hormones, we do have decreased adrenaline and decreased cortisol when we spend more time in nature. And this is, and I keep saying spend more time, but it is actually spend time in nature, and there's an immediate benefit. Our adrenaline and our cortisol go down quite a bit even after 120 minutes, which is the most recent study that's been done on cortisol levels, is spending 2 hours in nature actually procures a pretty strong effect, and that effect actually lasts for a little bit, up to a week or two. And it's also helpful for our cognitive health because we've got more blood flow to our brains, more neurotransmitters that help us feel better. We get a little sharper, we sleep better, all of those things. So let me just tell you a little bit about a forest bathing. I thought it would be nice for us to talk a little bit about, what is a forest bathing experience, or what is this practice of Shinrin-yoku. And in my training with the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy Guides, and also my Mindful Outdoor Leadership training, there's generally this sort of like idea of what an experience entails. And so a typical forest bathing experience is really a meander. It's a meander into a small area of a forest and an exploration of an ecosystem through the senses. So the practice is really about the senses, which I'll, if we have time, I'll walk us through that after we do a Q&A. One of the things that's the most important piece is just safety is number one. So if we've got all of our safety figured out, then that actually helps us to relax and to be welcomed into what we call the more than human world. A forest bathing experience typically lasts an hour to 3, and it has a reflection component after each exploration, which deepens the experience. So as we walk into the forest and we start to explore, what do we notice with our eyes, as an example, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then we come back as a group and we share. And when we listen to each other and what each other is noticing, that actually kind of sinks us into that, they call it a liminal space of just sort of being mindful and present in the forest. So we reinforce that with each other. So we go out and notice some things with our eyes, we come back and talk about it, and we go out and listen to some things, we come back and do a little share. And every time we go out and come back and share what we've noticed, it actually deepens our ability to really drop into this practice. Forest bathing experience always starts with logistics and instruction. And one of the things that we talk about is reducing our zone of disturbance, or our zone of impact. And that's, if you imagine that we are like a pebble in a lake, and if we are quiet as we plop, or we're small, or we try to keep our zone of disturbance small as we walk into a forest, by being quiet, by walking slowly and carefully, by being really mindful about making slow movements, the forest and the animals and beings in the forest don't get so startled. And so if we walk in, many of you have gone hiking with me, I do this often, walk in talking, we scare everyone away, and it takes a lot longer for them to come back and integrate us into the ecosystem. So when we walk in and we're quiet, the beings notice us, but they're a little more comfortable sort of coming back in. So birds get closer, squirrels get closer, insects get closer, sort of that kind of an invitation to just not have so much of a, like I said, zone of disturbance. And then we just open up into an invitation from the forest for us to come in and be in this setting. And I talked a little bit about, we explore through our senses and we share what we notice. And then oftentimes a really good forest bathing experience will end with a tea ceremony to wrap up the experience, to talk about it, to taste things from the forest, edible plants we can make the tea with, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And to wrap up the experience and to transition back into the human world. So for a minute, I'm going to just stop sharing, and I just want to, I'm just going to take a deep breath, and I just want to entertain a few questions. The next part of this talk, I was actually going to talk you through what I would say if we were really out forest bathing, and so if you're watching this on YouTube and you can sit outside, this next part might be nice to listen and to be involved, or, just to be in nature. But for us in real time tonight, it's dark and probably none of us are sitting in in a nature space. But I just wanted to see if there's any questions before we move on.
That was wonderful. I enjoyed the information. And you have such a soothing voice, so I already feel relaxed.
Oh.
And kudos for your daughter for doing dishes without being asked. All right.
Good, but also funny.
So if anyone has any questions, please type them in the chat window.
Or any surprises, any curiosities? Has anyone gone forest bathing?
There, I do have a question. Someone asked if there's any way you can share the high point of this with our county council and the planners who are working on the new downtown.
Yes, so I have, and all of the research. But if you, I'll type in my email address. I can send you what I sent them. But I thought it was really important. There's my email address. I thought it was really important to include the health benefits of nature and green spaces. And I know actually that many of you also shared that, because I've been in those county council meetings with you, but thanks for that. I think it's really important for us to understand the mental health benefits. There's some really interesting research on green spaces, not only for our pollinators, which is really important, but also for our mental health, for cooling down our spaces, for making them more welcome, and amazingly, there's been some urban studies on the more trees and green spaces, the less crime and violence there is in communities. So there's some really interesting intersections of nature, health, public health, population health, climate change. So a lot of really interesting research. So yeah, I've been sharing it. It's just a quiet screen of names. Well, good. So let's all take a deep breath. Maybe grab some tea if you can, and if it's okay with everyone, I'll walk you through what it would be to be on a forest bath, and I will look forward to doing this with all of us in person soon. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. All right. So we start with an exploration of the senses. So it doesn't matter which sense we start with, but I often start with eyes, and we're invited in to this exploration first by engaging with our sense of vision. So maybe for now you can imagine one of your favorite nature spaces, or a special tree, your garden, the park. And so usually we do this in stillness instead of with walking. So often we're sitting for this one. And so we try to expand our sight from our stillness, and actually exploring our peripheral vision. So keeping our head straight, and then trying to take in all of the peripheral vision. We take in every possible visual delight together at once, and then also separately. So just how many things can we notice at one time, and then how can we focus our eyesight on one being or one part of the light bouncing on the grass, or the way the leaves are moving in the wind, or one caterpillar inching her way along a leaf, and then coming back out and noticing how much movement there is, and how much we can see just by keeping our head still and sort of opening our eyes up into owl's eyes, we call it. And and just wondering or noticing, where's the light? How does it play with the grass, the leaves, the water? So we take several minutes in this. That's the general instruction. And allow people to really see, just explore with our vision. And we make adaptations depending on, on all of the senses. Not everyone has vision with their eyes. or hearing with their ears. And so, so we take that into account when we go on these adventures. And then after eyes, this, we would come back together. Usually I've managed in every forest walk that I've given to find a heart rock. And so I offer the heart rock around the circle, and whoever has the rock speaks a little about what they've noticed and share. The council practice is something that's really just about, like what I said before, just deepening our experience. And it's really just about listening to each other and not responding or interrupting or agreeing or disagreeing or anything. I always smile and nod. That's my personality. But traditionally, you're just we're taught to just listen. And then we go out with our ears. So, with this invitation, it's to connect with a sense of hearing, and to really sit down. And for me, it takes a little while. Like, I always hear the buzzing of my own head for a little bit before I can really settle into into what I'm hearing in the forest. But I love doing this deer's ears, where you just cup your ears and then direct them. And so just kind of, what can I hear on one side, the other, in front of me, behind me? What can I hear moving? As I'm sitting still or as I'm walking slowly. And just trying to capture the tiniest sounds, and then just trying to move and follow sounds, and then expanding out into sort of what are all the sounds we can hear, and then what do we hear over here on our right side, and listening to that. And then can we shift and listen to something from our left side? Can we hear something behind us, cupping our hands so that we can kind of hear back behind us? Listening to birds, listening to the streams, listening to the wind. There's always a human sound. So there's, always laughter or a chainsaw or an airplane or a car, crinkling sandwich wrappers, and being curious and listening to all of that, all of the nature sounds, the human sounds, that kind of thing. And so spending a little bit of time there, and then coming back in, and doing another heart rock round of a council practice. And then we go to smell. And smell is amazing. And it's also, for me, it's the hardest one. So we try to open our nostrils, and we smell with our tongue too. So open our nostrils, extend our tongues, explore our sense of smell and taste. And then there's always a little pause here, like there's a safety issue. So if we, if we don't know what it is and we don't know that it's safe to taste, then we wouldn't do that. And so I'm very careful in guiding around that. But I know many of you actually do know your plants. So the invitation is, when we can taste and smell together, it starts to open up our sense of smell a little bit. And the other sort of the technique that's been so surprising for me is just this idea of capturing a scent by gently rubbing, and I've got examples: sage, juniper, pine, but gently rubbing any of the plants or tree beings into our hands, and sort of gently massaging some of the oil into our fingers where it's concentrated, and then taking a deep whiff of that from our fingers to sort of label it and kind of catch what it is, and then going out to smell the air and finding that scent again. I think the first several times that I went forest bathing, I was like, what? I don't smell anything. And then I figured it out, like, oh, okay, I need to actually know what I'm looking for, and then really try to find it again out in the air. So it's an interesting practice. I think smell for me at least is a sense that I'm not always as connected to. And so and then I mentioned the tea ceremony before, and I've got a slide on it in a little bit, but this is where we would be gathering some, with permissions. We have a little practice of just asking permission and using our intuition to gather a few twigs and leaves that are safe, that we can make for the tea later. So that we can do sort of at the end a tea made from these plants in the forest that we've been spending time with. And then we come back and do a little council practice on what we noticed, what we smell. I went this last weekend with some friends and led a little forest bathing experience. And there were these, it was a dirt road. It was on the top of Mesa Gurule, which was very cool. I'd never been there before. And there were these just tiny little short, I'm not even sure what they were, plants in the road. And one of the folks that I was with actually bent down and smelled it, and it smelled like tea tree oil. It was like a very strong aromatic smell, and it was surprising to all of us. So there's just so many things to smell. It was really really fun to find a new very smelly plant. Anyway, and so anyway, coming back, sharing after we shared about smelling, we actually went back out and did a second smell experience, because there were things that people smelled that other people hadn't smelled yet, and so we all wanted to do it one more time. And then we came back and said, oh, I smelled this and I smelled that. So that was kind of a funny one. But anyway, forest bathing funny. It's like forest bathing jokes that we'd have to do the nose sense twice. But anyway. So then we do face, fingers, toes, exploring our sense of touch. And there's always an invitation with forest bathing to be barefoot. If it's safe and people are comfortable, it's another lovely way of exploring our senses, is by using our feet, and to notice what are we feeling that is, how does it feel with our hands versus our feet versus our face? Often doing, if there is water nearby, this is a great way to, this is a great one for just experiencing sort of what does water feel like, what does surface tension feel like, balancing. There's a little bit of a temperature differential above a stream, and so just feeling the air, and when it's colder, if there's more wind, less wind, that kind of thing. So touch is the final one of the senses, although there are several other senses, and I could go all day with senses, and we've explored a lot of these as we've gone out on these forest bathing experiences. Our sense of gratitude, intuition, proprioception, which is a favorite one of mine. Just what does it feel like to balance on a log, to be on one foot, to walk over stones and rocks that are moving. Our sense of play, our sense of compassion, which I think nature appreciates when we go out and we have a sense of compassion and we play with that with nature. Our sense of creativity, we've made some magic wands with twigs and flowers. A sense of reciprocity, so where's our relationship with nature, and how can we explore that with a being, a tree or a plant, where we really sit and learn about each other, and think about how we're both together in this moment. our sense of belonging, how we feel comforted and nourished, our sense of curiosity, and also our sense of responsibility. So, so the tea ceremony is, so after we've gone through all of the senses, people are in a pretty, as you can imagine, or if you've experienced this, it's a very wonderful, wild place in the brain. It's why it's kind of nice to have a guide to sort of hold the edges in, because it would be really easy to just never leave. You know, it's so pleasant to be spending this much time just freely being in nature. And so, you know, the role of the guide is really to give a little bit of structure and to just also be monitoring for safety stuff, checking for, you know, lightning, you know, making sure that people are staying close, that comfort and needs are met, that kind of thing. The tea ceremony is, it can be very elaborate. It can be very simple. Ideally, you're gathering edible plants along the way. And, you know, not in New Mexico, but when I learned this in Massachusetts, you can actually start a little fire with a little tiny solo stove, which is very cool. I'm not very good at this, but people know how to start fires with flint and steel and birch shavings in little balls, and so there's like a whole elaborate fire thing that we would dare never do in New Mexico, because of our respect for the forest and for fires here. But ideally, you would have a fire to boil some water, to create some tea, sit comfortably in a circle, maybe share some fruit, talk, have a council practice with the heart rock, that ideally found a heart rock or a really cool stick or magic wand, and sit and enjoy. And that's sort of how to sort of bring people back out of that liminal place and more into that transitioning back into the human world and being prepared to actually drive home in one piece, that kind of thing. So these are flowers that I planted at the beginning of the summer by seed that I got at our fantastic garden store, Petrie. I didn't know what would happen, but they've been making me very happy for several weeks now. So we had a mint tea ceremony after a forest bath 2 weeks ago, and this is the picture from that. And then I have all these references. So I'll stop sharing. I'm happy to send the PowerPoint to anyone if they need it. And I'm wondering, well, thank you for letting me walk you through that. And we have 12 more minutes. I'm wondering if there's any questions, thoughts, curiosities, plans. What should we do with forest bathing in Los Alamos?
Well, I'm looking forward to hopefully setting up a program where we partner. You could come help us here at PEEC, and maybe we could get some
fantastic
people out on the trails, obviously when it's safe to do so. Mm-hmm. Right now, we haven't been running our hiking programs, but in the future, for sure, I would love to participate in that.
There will be a time when we are done with this pandemic, and we will be so glad to be together, and it will be even more beautiful.
So we can leave it open for some questions. You can type your questions in the chat. Dorothy said, we definitely need forest bathing in Los Alamos. I would love to have the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so good. Heidi did give her email in the chat window. If it's easier for you, Heidi, if anyone's interested, maybe they can email you and request that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then I can certainly, I've got a lot of the research. So if anyone's interested in reading the research or pursuing this. I'm really happy to talk to you. The training, I did the first training and it was fantastic and perfect. And for my own mental health during COVID, I'm doing the second training with the ANFT because it feels really good to be learning about nature and health and forest bathing practice. I love being in school, and so I can highly recommend the programs that I've done, and I'm excited to share this with my community.
I do have some comments coming in.
Okay.
Malcolm said, I would love to practice forest bathing with you, and I wonder how the experience would change with or without the children. I think they would love it.
They would love it, Malcolm. We can totally do that.
Sam said, love this. I imagine that all of us are watching and feeling relaxed just hearing the benefits of forest bathing compared to those whose blood pressure is going up watching the debate.
Yes, I think this is it. I am personally glad to be here. I do think that it's good to spend some time in nature right now, for sure.
Colleen commented, the demo garden across from the library has a sensory portion with plants for smell, touch, sight, taste.
Colleen, I didn't know that. I'm going to go explore. That's so cool. I love that garden. I just haven't been over there in a little bit. Thank you for telling us.
And Arlene asked, have you gone to other countries for forest bathing and practiced forest bathing?
No, but one of our Los Alamos friends went to Japan and shared their story with me this last year. And I definitely want to go. There's some really interesting documentaries about forest bathing that are in other countries. And I would love to be in those mossy green places. So I haven't, but I'd love to. Maybe we can get the mountaineers to do it.
A field trip.
Right? That'd be awesome.
All right, so that's all I have on my end, reading the chat window. Any last questions, anyone? Well, Heidi, thank you so much for sharing with us. Your presentation was lovely.
One thing I'll just offer up an invitation. I didn't put this in the PowerPoint, but there's a practice called sit spotting, and it's just sitting in nature for 10 minutes a day. There's a lot of good research for that. So even if you can't take yourself out on an immersion, although this isn't rocket science, it would be fantastic, I think, for all of us to spend more time just sitting and being quiet in nature. So hopefully everyone can have a sit spot for a few minutes tomorrow quietly and get to know a little bit of the more than human world in your neighborhood.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight for this PEEC presentation. Heidi, thank you so much for your time. And I hope everyone can keep this sense of relaxation with you as you go about the rest of your evening. And yes, if you have any questions, feel free to email Heidi. The email's in the chat thread. Or if you would like to connect with PEEC, our email is PEEC, P-E-E-C, @peaknature.org. And good evening, everyone.
Great.
Bye.
Bye.